When retired NBA legend Big Shaq walked onto the basketball court at a packed arena, he expected nothing more than an evening of basketball and camaraderie. But what started as a routine halftime appearance turned into an explosive confrontation when overzealous security guards mistook him for a trespasser. With the crowd watching in stunned silence and phones recording every second, the tension escalated. Little did anyone know, this misunderstanding would ignite a viral storm, challenge deep-seated prejudices, and reveal a side of Shaq that the world had never seen before. The roar of the crowd echoed through the packed arena, an electric buzz pulsing through every seat and aisle. It was game night, a high-stakes NBA matchup that had drawn fans from across the country. From the courtside seats to the nosebleed sections, thousands of voices merged into a symphony of excitement, their anticipation vibrating with every play. The Jumbotron flickered with highlights, players warmed up with choreographed precision, and the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, hyping the crowd to a fever pitch. At the center of it all, soaking in the energy, was Big Shaq. A towering presence in every sense, Shaq was more than just a retired NBA legend. He was a cultural icon. His hulking frame, unmistakable laugh, and infectious charisma had made him a household name long after he'd hung up his jersey. In his playing days, he had dominated the court with sheer force and finesse. Now, as a commentator and entrepreneur, he continued to captivate audiences with his sharp wit and larger-than-life personality. As he made his way through the crowded concourse, fans erupted in cheers. "Big Shaq, you're the man!" someone shouted, and Shaq responded with his signature grin, pausing to pose for a selfie with a young fan clutching a basketball. His presence turned heads everywhere, a reminder of his enduring legacy in the world of sports. Tonight, Shaq had come to support his former team and enjoy the game, like countless times before. Clad in a custom-tailored suit that only emphasized his imposing frame, he exuded the confidence of someone who knew his worth and his place in the history of the game. The chain around his neck gleamed under the stadium lights, a subtle nod to his roots and unshakable pride. The air was thick with excitement as halftime approached. The home team led by a slim margin, and the energy from the fans fueled every play. Cameras panned across the audience, capturing celebrities, die-hard fans painted in team colors, and even Shaq himself. Each time his face flashed on the Jumbotron, the crowd erupted, chanting his name with fervor. At halftime, Shaq rose from his seat, intending to greet some of the players and perhaps join in on a light-hearted halftime show, something he often did to delight the fans. The arena's energy shifted slightly as the legend made his way toward the court. Fans leaned forward, phones poised to capture a glimpse of greatness up close. But not everyone recognized the moment for what it was. As Shaq approached the court, a pair of security guards exchanged glances. The senior guard, a burly man with a tightly clenched jaw and a no-nonsense demeanor, gave a slight nod to his younger counterpart. "Who does this guy think he is, walking onto the court like he owns it?" The junior guard muttered, his hand tightening on the radio clipped to his belt. "Stay sharp," the senior guard replied, his voice laced with suspicion. "We can't let anyone disrupt the game, even if they're dressed to impress." From a distance, their posturing might have seemed like standard procedure, but the undertones of their interaction hinted at something deeper, a bias rooted in assumptions. As they tracked Shaq's movements, their focus sharpened, and their suspicions grew, ignoring the excited whispers of fans pointing out the basketball legend. Shaq, oblivious to their scrutiny, continued toward the court, flashing a wave at the players warming up. The lights overhead gleamed off his polished shoes, and his stride was steady and unhurried, the stride of a man who belonged. Yet to the guards, his confidence came off as arrogance, his ease as entitlement. The crowd's cheers, the rhythmic thrum of the music, and the dazzling spectacle of the arena painted a perfect picture of celebration and community. But beneath the surface, the tension brewed, a storm waiting to unleash its force. Unaware of the unfolding narrative behind him, Shaq stepped closer to the court, ready to engage with the game he loved. The stage was set, the characters in place, and the drama about to unfold would leave the crowd, and Shaq stunned. The halftime buzz in the arena was at its peak. Fans chatted excitedly, the energy of the game still electrifying the air, and the anticipation of the second half kept them glued to their seats. It was amidst this controlled chaos that the first sparks of confrontation began to flicker. Shaq, with his easygoing stride and magnetic presence, stepped onto the edge of the court. He waved to fans, acknowledging their cheers, and exchanged quick nods with a few familiar faces on the sidelines. But the moment of ease was short-lived. Across the court, 2 security guards spotted him. They weren't ordinary staff. Their presence suggested authority, but their expressions carried something else, a rigid, overzealous air that bordered on distrust. "Who's that guy? He doesn't look like he belongs here," the younger guard muttered, adjusting the strap of his radio. "Doesn't matter who he thinks he is," the older guard replied, his gaze narrowing. "No one steps onto the court without clearance." Their steps quickened as they moved toward Shaq, their faces a mix of irritation and suspicion. To the crowd, the movement was subtle at first, just part of the usual arena shuffle. But for those closer to the court, the tension was palpable, like the shift in the air before a thunderstorm. "Excuse me, sir," the older guard barked, his voice cutting through the cheers and the halftime announcements. His tone was firm, commanding, and unmistakably confrontational. Shaq turned, his warm expression fading into one of mild confusion. "Yes," he said, his deep voice calm, yet carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being treated with respect. "This area is restricted. You're not authorized to be here," the younger guard added, his hand instinctively hovering near his radio as if preparing for escalation. Shaq raised a hand, a gesture meant to diffuse tension. "Fellas, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just here to say hi to some old friends." But his measured words did little to deter the guards. The senior guard stepped closer, his chest puffed up, his posture confrontational. "We don't care who you're here to see. You need to step back, now." For a moment, Shaq didn't move. His towering frame made the guards look small in comparison, and the stark contrast between their tense aggression and his composed demeanor was almost surreal. "I've been here plenty of times," Shaq said, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "You sure you know who you're talking to?" By now, murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. Fans seated near the court began leaning forward, trying to make sense of the scene. "Wait, isn't that Shaq?" someone whispered. "What are they doing? That's Big Shaq!" Another voice called out, louder this time. The players warming up on the court started to notice as well, their movements slowing as they exchanged puzzled glances. A couple of them even stepped closer, unsure whether to intervene or wait. The murmurs turned into audible gasps as one of the guards placed a hand on Shaq's arm, as though to forcibly guide him away. The tension in the air thickened, a mix of disbelief and discomfort radiating through the arena. "Get your hands off him!" a fan shouted from the stands. Shaq exhaled deeply, his patience visibly waning. He gently pulled his arm back, his expression shifting to one of steely resolve. "Look," he said, his tone firmer now. "I've been in this arena more times than I can count. I've played here, I've worked here, and I've got every right to stand on this court. So maybe you want to double-check before you make a mistake you'll regret." But the guards weren't backing down. Whether out of pride, ignorance, or sheer stubbornness, they continued their aggressive stance. "Rules are rules," the older guard said sharply. "You need to leave." At this point, the crowd's confusion turned to frustration. People began pulling out their phones, recording the interaction, their disbelief evident. "This is ridiculous," a woman shouted from the stands. "You're embarrassing yourselves," another fan yelled, her voice echoing through the hushed arena. Yet, amidst the chaos, Shaq remained composed. His years of experience, both as an athlete under pressure and as a public figure facing scrutiny, helped him keep his cool. But even he couldn't completely hide the frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You've got an entire arena of witnesses," Shaq said, gesturing toward the fans and cameras now pointed at them. "Maybe it's time to think about what you're doing." But instead of de-escalating, the guard seemed even more determined to assert their authority. The younger guard reached for his radio, muttering into it, "We've got a situation on the court. Need backup." Shaq shook his head, a mix of disbelief and disappointment etched across his face. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. As the tension mounted, one of the players, a former teammate of Shaq's, stepped forward. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. The moment hung in the air, the arena now eerily quiet, except for the hum of the jumbotron and the whispers of the stunned crowd. The stage was set for what would come next, a confrontation that would not only expose the guards' ignorance, but leave the entire arena in shock. The murmur of the crowd swelled as the security guards, emboldened by their misunderstanding, took a more aggressive stance. The younger guard, with a radio in one hand and determination etched into his face, gestured at Shaq to step back. "I'm not going to ask again," he said, his voice amplified by the growing silence of a once buzzing arena. Shaq stood his ground, his hands raised slightly to show he wasn't looking for a confrontation. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be," he said, his voice calm but tinged with frustration. The senior guard wasn't having it. He stepped forward, closing the space between himself and the towering figure of Shaq. "You need to leave. Now," he barked, as if addressing an unruly spectator. A wave of gasps rippled through the audience. More fans stood up, their phones out, recording every second of the interaction. Whispers turned to audible protests. "Are they serious? That's Shaq. Leave him alone. He's done more for this game than you ever will." Shaq's eyes scanned the crowd briefly, taking in the sea of concerned faces. The public outcry made it clear that most people knew exactly who he was. But the guards, whether blinded by their arrogance or genuinely oblivious, pressed on. One guard grabbed Shaq's elbow, attempting to lead him off the court. The audience erupted in boos, the collective sound reverberating off the arena walls. Shaq's patience wavered. He gently but firmly pulled his arm away, his voice now carrying more steel. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The younger guard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "This is private property, and you're trespassing. You're going to leave, or we're going to escort you out." The absurdity of the accusation hit Shaq like a punch to the gut. His jaw tightened, his deep brown eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The situation reached its boiling point when the guards decided to escalate things further. Shaq, now surrounded by a cluster of security personnel, was ushered toward the backstage area. Fans yelled in protest, some even chanting his name. "Shaq! Shaq! Leave him alone!" The chaos moved through the narrow, dimly lit corridors behind the court. Shaq's towering frame dwarfed everyone around him, yet the humiliation of being herded like an intruder cut deeper than he expected. "Someone's gotta be joking," he muttered under his breath. As they reached the backstage holding area, an event manager appeared, his face pale and his movements frantic. Dressed in a poorly fitted suit and clutching a clipboard, the manager looked from Shaq to the guards and back, clearly overwhelmed. "What's going on here?" the manager asked, his voice strained. The senior guard stepped forward. This guy was on the court without clearance, refused to leave when asked. The manager's eyes widened as he took in Shaq's massive frame and unmistakable face. For a moment, recognition flickered, but instead of immediately rectifying the situation, he hesitated. "Well, let me check the credentials," he stammered, flipping through his clipboard with trembling hands. Shaq's lips pressed into a tight line. His frustration boiled over, but he kept his tone measured. "I've been here a dozen times. You don't need a clipboard to know who I am." Instead of diffusing the situation, the manager fumbled further. Let's not make a scene. We'll sort this out quietly." Shaq's laugh was short and humorless. "Quietly? You've got half the arena recording this right now. I'm not the one making a scene." The moment crystallized Shaq's frustration. He wasn't just angry at the guards. This was about more than that. It was about the disrespect, the assumptions, the way his identity was being questioned despite his immense contributions to the sport and community. As the chaos unfolded, Shaq's mind raced. Anger threatened to take over, but he knew the stakes were too high. He had spent his entire life building a reputation as a leader, a philanthropist, a mentor. Losing his temper now, even in the face of blatant injustice, could shatter everything he'd worked for. But the sting of humiliation cut deep. Memories surfaced, times when he was underestimated, judged, or treated as less than, despite his accomplishments. He had thought those days were behind him, yet here he was, being treated as if he didn't belong. A voice in his head whispered, "This is why you've worked so hard. To prove them wrong, to rise above it." But another voice, louder and more insistent, pushed back. Why should you have to keep proving yourself? When will it ever be enough? Shaq took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He knew he had to handle this with grace, not just for himself, but for the fans watching, for the kids who looked up to him, and for the people who might face similar treatment without the platform he had. Back in the arena, the fans weren't staying silent. The murmurs had turned into shouts, and the tension spilled over into open outrage. "This is disgusting," one woman yelled, her voice trembling with anger. "Do your jobs and apologize," another man shouted, pointing toward the guards. Players and coaches started gathering near the court's edge, their expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. A couple of commentators, caught off guard by the commotion, tried to piece together what was happening live on air. "You're telling me they don't recognize Shaq?" one announcer asked incredulously. "This is a joke, right?" The public spectacle intensified with every passing second, the arena's energy now charged with tension and disbelief. Despite the mounting chaos, Shaq stood tall. His calm exterior betrayed none of the storm raging inside him. He locked eyes with the manager, his voice low but firm. "I'm not going to let this slide, not for me, but for everyone who's watching this right now." The manager swallowed hard, realizing the weight of the moment. But before he could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps filled the corridor. A familiar voice cut through the tension. "What the hell is going on here?" The camera operator from the local station, who had been trailing the guards, stepped into view. With her was one of Shaq's former teammates, now an assistant coach for the opposing team. His presence added a new layer to the already intense situation, and it was clear that things were about to take a dramatic turn. The corridor buzzed with tension as the security guards stood their ground, oblivious to the mounting chaos they had caused. Shaq's calm but towering presence seemed to unnerve them more than they let on. Phones were still recording, voices whispered in disbelief, and the atmosphere crackled with the electric charge of a moment on the verge of eruption. Then came the voice, authoritative, cutting through the noise like a blade. "What in the world is going on here?" All eyes turned as an older man in a tailored gray suit strode purposefully toward the scene. It was Charles Rivers, the team owner, and one of the most respected figures in the league. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as his sharp eyes landed on Shaq. "Shaq?" he exclaimed, his voice tinged with incredulity. The senior security guard's jaw slackened. You know him?" Rivers shot him a look that could cut steel. "Know him? Are you seriously asking me that? That's Shaquille O'Neal, one of the greatest players this league has ever seen." The guards froze, the weight of their mistake crashing down on them like a tidal wave. The younger guard's face turned ashen and he stammered, We didn't realize." "You didn't realize?" Rivers interrupted, his voice rising with controlled fury. "He's a global icon. How could you not realize?" Shaq, still calm but now visibly disappointed, raised a hand to silence Rivers. "It's not about who I am," he said, his deep voice resonating in the now silent hallway. "It's about how I was treated." Rivers's expression softened slightly as he turned back to the guards. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? This isn't just an insult to Shaq. It's a disgrace to the league and everything we stand for." The guards exchanged glances, their earlier arrogance replaced by humiliation and fear. Unbeknownst to the guards, the moment Rivers recognized Shaq had already been captured by countless fans. Within minutes, videos of the incident flooded social media. Clips of Shaq being confronted, the guards' dismissive attitude, and Rivers' fiery reprimand spread like wildfire. On Twitter, hashtags like Respect Shaq, Disrespect, and NBA Icon began trending. Influential commentators and former players weighed in, their posts amplifying the outrage. Unbelievable. How do you not recognize Shaq? The disrespect is unreal. This is bigger than basketball. It's about how we treat people, period. Glad Shaq is taking the high road. Security might want to brush up on their history. You don't disrespect greatness. The public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Fans expressed their anger and disbelief, while others praised Shaq for his composure in the face of blatant disrespect. As the dust began to settle, Shaq found himself in a quiet room with Rivers and a few team executives. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving behind a mix of emotions. "This isn't just about me," Shaq said, leaning forward, his massive hands clasped together. "It's about what this says to every fan watching, every kid out there who gets treated differently because of how they look or who people think they are." Rivers nodded solemnly. "You're right. This moment is bigger than basketball." Shaq took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I've been blessed with a platform, and I can't let something like this slide. Not because I'm Shaq, but because it's a chance to remind people about respect, humility, and not jumping to conclusions." That evening, Shaq stepped onto the court during halftime, not as a player, but as a speaker. The arena had been buzzing with chatter about the incident, and when he appeared, the crowd erupted into applause. Standing at mid-court, under the blinding lights, Shaq held the microphone with practiced ease. His expression was calm but resolute. "First, let me say thank you to all of you," he began, his deep voice echoing through the arena. "The love and support I've felt from fans like you are what make moments like this worth it." The applause swelled, but Shaq raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "But I need to talk about what happened earlier," he continued. "Today, I had an experience that reminded me how far we've come, and how far we still have to go." The crowd quieted, hanging on his every word. "What happened wasn't about me being Shaq," he said. "It was about assumptions, about judgments, about treating people with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from." The arena was silent now, every eye fixed on him. "I don't want this moment to be about anger or blame," he said. "I want it to be about learning, about doing better. Because whether you're a security guard, a fan, or someone just trying to make it in this world, respect should be a given, not something you have to earn by proving who you are." The crowd erupted into a standing ovation, the sound washing over Shaq like a wave. Back in the locker room, the security guards watched the speech on a small monitor, their faces etched with regret. The younger guard, still reeling from the fallout, turned to his colleague. "We really messed up," he said quietly. The older guard nodded, his arrogance now replaced by introspection. "We did, and it's on us to make it right." The next day, both guards issued a public apology, admitting their mistake and pledging to do better. While some fans were quick to criticize, others applauded their willingness to take responsibility. Shaq's speech, and the incident itself, sparked a broader conversation about respect, prejudice, and the importance of humility. Sports networks dedicated segments to the topic, while fans shared their own stories of judgment and redemption. Shaq, as always, took it in stride, using his platform to amplify the message. "This wasn't just a lesson for them," he said during an interview. "It was a reminder for all of us." The incident, once a moment of embarrassment, became a turning point, not just for the guards, but for the thousands of people who watched and learned from Shaq's unwavering grace. The air in the arena's administrative offices was heavy with tension as the incident reverberated through the organization. The security guards, once so sure of their authority, now sat in stunned silence across from the team's management. The video evidence was irrefutable, their actions replayed in stark detail across social media and news broadcasts. "We cannot condone what happened here today," the head of security said, his tone clipped and his expression stern. "You acted without verifying facts, escalated unnecessarily, and embarrassed not just this organization but the league as a whole." The guards shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, younger and visibly shaken, stammered, "We didn't realize it was Shaq. We thought—" "Thought what?" the manager interrupted. "That someone who didn't fit your assumptions didn't belong? That's exactly the problem." By the end of the meeting, disciplinary actions were swift and severe. The guards faced suspensions, and the organization issued an immediate public apology to Shaq, acknowledging the mistake and pledging to implement better training to prevent similar incidents in the future. The story spread like wildfire. News outlets, sports commentators, and social media influencers seized upon the footage, dissecting every moment of the confrontation. The headlines were damning. "Security ejects NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal in stunning display of ignorance." "Assumptions and arrogance, the disrespect of a basketball icon." "Shaq's grace in the face of humiliation inspires millions." Television segments aired debates on the broader implications of the incident, focusing on assumptions, implicit bias, and the treatment of public figures. Panelists praised Shaq's calm demeanor, with one sports analyst noting, "It's a testament to his character that he handled this with such grace. He could have blown up, but he chose to use this as a teachable moment instead." On social media, hashtags like #RespectShaq and #BiasInSports trended for days. Fans, celebrities, and former players weighed in, expressing their support and sharing their outrage. Clips of Shaq's halftime speech, where he emphasized respect and understanding, were viewed millions of times, cementing the moment as a cultural touchstone. Later that week, Shaq appeared on a popular late-night talk show, his presence larger than life, but his tone reflective. When the host asked how he felt during the incident, Shaq paused before responding. "It wasn't about me being Shaq," he said. "It was about what that moment represented. For me, sure, it was frustrating, but what about the people who don't have a platform? What about the folks who get judged every day because of how they look, where they come from, or what someone assumes about them?" The audience erupted into applause, but Shaq raised a hand to quiet them. "This isn't about anger," he continued. "It's about understanding, about learning, and about making sure we do better, because we can." Shaq's words resonated deeply, sparking conversations across the country. He used his platform to highlight the need for humility, fairness, and awareness, partnering with organizations to develop programs focused on unconscious bias training and promoting equality in workplaces and public spaces. The fallout from the incident extended beyond the individuals involved. The organization behind the arena announced sweeping changes, including mandatory training for all staff and a commitment to fostering a more inclusive environment. Fans, inspired by Shaq's response, began sharing their own experiences with prejudice, turning the narrative into a broader movement. "If Shaq can handle this with such grace," one fan tweeted, "we can all do better in standing up against bias and judgment." As the dust settled, Shaq reflected on the incident during an interview with a respected sports journalist. Sitting comfortably in a studio, he shared his thoughts with characteristic candor. "What happened wasn't right, but it gave us a chance to talk about something bigger," he said. "We all make mistakes, but it's what we do after that matters. Are we learning? Are we growing? That's what I hope comes out of this." The journalist leaned forward, intrigued. "And what about you? How do you feel looking back?" Shaq's trademark grin returned, but his eyes remained serious. "I feel good knowing we turned something negative into something positive. That's the real win." In the end, the incident became a catalyst for change, proving that even moments of injustice could lead to understanding and growth when approached with wisdom and grace. Through it all, Shaq remained a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the power of humility in the face of adversity. The air in the packed arena was electric with anticipation. But tonight, the buzz wasn't just about basketball. The NBA had organized a special segment during halftime to honor Shaq, transforming the previous week's unfortunate incident into a powerful, teachable moment. The announcer's voice rang through the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we recognize a legend, not just for his contributions on the court, but for his leadership, grace, and commitment to positive change." Shaq walked to center court, greeted by a thunderous standing ovation. The NBA commissioner stood beside him, offering an apology on behalf of the organization. "We deeply regret what occurred last week," the commissioner said, his voice resolute. "It was a moment of failure, but it's one we're committed to learning from. Shaq, you are not only an icon of the game, but a role model for all of us." As a gesture of accountability, the NBA announced new initiatives, including comprehensive training for all event staff on unconscious bias and conflict de-escalation. The move was met with applause, signaling a turning point for the organization. When handed the microphone, Shaq's towering presence commanded the room, but his tone was warm and humble. "I appreciate this recognition," he began, his deep voice reverberating. "But this isn't about me. It's about respect for everyone. Assumptions and snap judgments can lead to situations like what happened last week. And let's be honest, it happens every day to people who don't have the platform I do." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "We need to do better, on and off the court. Respect shouldn't depend on who you are or what you've achieved. It should be for everyone, always. The audience erupted into cheers, their applause underscoring the power of his words. Shaq took a moment to thank the fans for their support, the NBA for its swift action, and the broader community for turning a negative moment into an opportunity for growth. Social media lit up with clips of Shaq's speech, accompanied by hashtags like Respect for All and Shaq Inspires. Fans shared their admiration for his composure and his ability to transform adversity into advocacy. Shaq could have been bitter, but he's using his platform to make a difference. That's real leadership, one tweet read, garnering thousands of likes. Sports analysts and commentators echoed the sentiment, praising both Shaq's grace and the NBA's efforts to address the situation transparently. It's not just about fixing a mistake, said one analyst. It's about setting a precedent for accountability and respect in every arena. The incident sparked broader discussions across industries, with companies, schools, and organizations citing it as an example of why addressing bias is critical. The NBA's new training programs became a model for other sports leagues, and Shaq's message resonated far beyond the world of basketball. At the next game, Shaq watched from his usual courtside seat. But this time, he was greeted with a different kind of recognition. Fans waved signs reading, "Thank you, Shaq," and young kids in jerseys looked up to him with admiration, not just for his career, but for his character. As the game progressed, Shaq leaned back, a rare moment of relaxation. He felt a sense of closure, not because the incident had been erased, but because it had become a catalyst for something greater. For Shaq, the lesson was clear. Even in moments of conflict, there's an opportunity to lead, inspire, and bring about meaningful change. And that, he realized, was a victory far more valuable than any championship ring. The arena buzzed with excitement as fans poured in for another unforgettable NBA showdown. This time, Shaq walked through the halls of the stadium, greeted not with suspicion, but with warm smiles and heartfelt gestures. The staff, now equipped with new training programs championed by Shaq himself, welcomed him with genuine respect. In the months following the incident, Shaq partnered with the NBA to launch Courtside Respect, an initiative promoting workplace equality and awareness. The program included workshops on unconscious bias, seminars led by influential figures in sports and social justice, and scholarships for underprivileged youth aspiring to work in sports management. "I wanted to turn a negative moment into something that lasts," Shaq explained during the program's launch. "Respect shouldn't just be a buzzword, it should be a practice." The initiative gained national attention, inspiring other sports leagues and organizations to adopt similar measures. Shaq's efforts transcended basketball, becoming a symbol of how grace under pressure can lead to systemic change. As the game began, Shaq settled into his usual courtside seat, the cheers of the crowd filling the air. A young fan approached him, clutching a sign that read, "Thank you, Shaq." With a warm smile, Shaq posed for a photo, embodying the resilience and leadership that had made him a hero both on and off the court. The once strained relationship between Shaq and the arena staff had transformed into a bond of mutual respect. The security guards now served as ambassadors for the change Shaq had inspired, greeting every guest with professionalism and care. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the power of respect and understanding. Share this story to spark meaningful conversations about prejudice and dignity. Together, we can inspire change and build a world where everyone is seen for who they truly are. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that make a difference.